All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Self-Righteous Blood, our study of the book of Judges. You might have noticed I'm still on the less than ideal setup for this sort of thing. I was hoping to have those technical issues resolved. I made a couple of mistakes while I was trying to fix the PC, so that's going to be probably back to normal next week. I appreciate your patience with me. We are right about in the middle of the book of Judges. How many chapters were there again? 21? Yeah, so we're almost to the middle. Yeah, 21. We have so far seen the pattern of judges really well established. The idea that these judges are put in place by God in order to deliver the people of Israel. There really wouldn't be a need for the judges had the people been doing what they were supposed to be in the first place, as God had told them that if they would just follow his commandments, they wouldn't have to worry about outside oppression, but they don't really follow his commandments, and so you have this consistent problem going on. Our last section, our last 3 chapters, dealt with who I believe to be the second most famous of the judges, and that was Gideon. Gideon lives this really interesting life. If you're going to take one lesson from his life, it's that when the judges were doing well, it's not because of their own power, but because God was blessing them. Certainly that's illustrated in the battle at Mount Tabor when he's whittled down to only 300 men and still wins that battle. There's a certain, there's famous examples of people holding out against incredible odds. I guess if we're going to talk 300 people, the Battle of Thermopylae is a great example of that, right? But, they did lose the Battle of Thermopylae, right? I mean, they lost it very pyrrhically, at least as far as the Persians were concerned, and they succeeded in their goals of delaying their Persian enemies. And then later, at the Battle of Marathon, the Greeks were able to defeat the Persians, but they still lost Thermopylae. You could say the same thing about the Alamo, right? The outnumbered force did eventually lose. The outnumbered force is, 1, not on the defense here, and 2, it wins, and it wins by a lot. It's God's intervention. It's not the brilliancy of Gideon. Unfortunately, Gideon's end of his life, I don't know if you could really call it the end of his life. It was probably the majority of his life, to be honest. But as far as the record is concerned, the end of his life is tarnished because of his creating of this new ephod, which was a stumbling block for his household. In addition, he does some other things. He becomes a polygamist, starts taking part in concubinage. Is that the way to pronounce that word? Concubinage? Concubinage? Whatever. He gets a concubine, and that's a problem. And so unfortunately, his legacy is tarnished because of this. We do have to remember that he is among these people considered part of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, and a lot of the ones who are included in that from the book of Judges, they are all a little bit questionable, I suppose. Not to say that we ought to question the Lord's judgment of them, but perhaps if we were judging them based on just the record, we would judge them more harshly than the Lord does there. It's a good reminder for us that God is a merciful judge. But Gideon's one of the ones up there, so try not to judge Gideon too harshly. But he does do some pretty messed up things. And we're going to see some of the consequences of that here in chapter 9. The mention of the concubine is important because he does have this concubine in Shechem, and has a son by her by the name of Abimelech. Now, had you been reading through the Old Testament up to this point, you might have heard the name Abimelech before, specifically in the book of Genesis. Several generations before this time, we had people named Abimelech as well. 2 of them, perhaps. One of them, the first time we see somebody named Abimelech is when he is dealing with Abraham. And famously, Abraham lied, or he gave a half-truth, which, let's be honest, that's a lie, to Abimelech. Because he said to Abimelech of his wife, Sarah, "This is my sister." Well, it was a half-truth. Sarah was Abraham's half-sister, but she was also his wife, and for the intents and purposes of that was the important detail. As a result, and the reason he did that is because Sarah was beautiful, and he was afraid that Abimelech would kill him and then take her to be his wife. And Abimelech ends up showing Abraham up on righteousness in that particular account, because when it comes out that this in fact was Abraham's wife, Abimelech returns her to him and then scolds him for not telling him the truth. I can't remember if this happened before or after the exact same thing happening again with the Pharaoh of Egypt. But then later, in the case of Abraham's son Isaac, with his wife Rebekah, the exact same thing happens. I suppose that's a lesson about the example that we set for our children. And the same thing happens, and it still says Abimelech. The fact that Abimelech is being used here and it's at the same area, that might be an indication that Abimelech is not actually his name, but a title. In fact, the word Abimelech means my father is king. And so when we see Abimelech there, that might be a good indication that this is not actually the dude's name. Remember that the Bible doesn't often say that the Pharaoh did this, right? If it's talking about Egypt, it just says Pharaoh did this. It's reasonable to assume then that Abimelech is a title and not actually a name, which might help us understand Abimelech here. I don't think he was born with the name Abimelech. You might remember towards the end of Gideon's life, or at least the record about Gideon. Once again, I don't think it's actually at the end of his life, but towards the end of what we were reading about Gideon, the people tried to make him king. And he said, no, I'm not going to be king. I'll take all your money, but I won't be king. And apparently, Abimelech takes his name on himself. My father is king. And he uses that as a jumping off point to do what he does next. So let's start reading about Abimelech. Judges chapter 9, verse 1. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, remember that Jerubbaal was the other name for Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. I am so sorry, all. You're going to have to give me just 1 second. It sounds like we have this weird alarm system that goes off when weird things happen with the power. It's been going off more than that recently. I don't know if you can hear it right now, but I sure can. And it's going to bug me senseless. So give me no more than like 2 minutes. I'll be right back. I'm so sorry. In the words of Daffy Duck, oh brother, what a way to run a railroad. Sorry about that, everybody. Not exactly super likely to happen, but I guess it was bound to happen sooner or later. Anyway, appreciate your patience. Where were we? We were reading about Abimelech, and he had been speaking... Yeah, he had been speaking to the people of Shechem. There's a conspiracy going over on here. And we return in verse 4. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, and with Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the son of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself, and all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar of Shechem. So this is what's happening. After the death of Gideon, he said he's not going to be king, but boy, he's sure acting like it, isn't he? And as he has been acting like king, when he dies, Abimelech goes to the people of Shechem. And his argument is this: is it better that you got 70 sons? Remember, Gideon was a polygamist. 70 sons of Gideon who are going to rule over you, or is it better just to have one ruler? I think it should be me. And it works. Works for two reasons, I believe. Reason number one is the immediate reason that the scriptures give, which is he says, I am your brother. Remember, he's not the son of a wife of Gideon. He's a son of this concubine of Gideon who lived in Shechem. And so he grew up among the Shechemites, who at this time apparently were a major city. And so he had more clout with them. They figured he's going to be more interested in our interests. And so he's a better one to establish. I also think this is partially because it was easy to fight against the natural candidate. If anybody is thinking in a monarchical sense, the natural candidate to succeed Gideon in rule, which was his oldest son. And the name of his oldest son escapes me just for one moment, but we can find it when we go to chapter 8. Jether. That was his son. And the reason we can look back in chapter 8 and see that is because Jether, you might remember, was the one that Gideon had told to execute Zebah and Zalmunna, but because he was still young, he wasn't able to do so. I kind of feel like this might have messed with the reputation of Jether for the rest of his life, and people would have saw him as a weak man because of this. I don't know if that's the case, but that could be well it. So my theory is, for these reasons, Abimelech was able to rile up the people of Shechem. And he is given 70 pieces of silver to hire what the Bible calls worthless men. That phrase occasionally shows up. This is not saying that these are men who are not made in the image of God, and if they were around today wouldn't be worth evangelizing to or whatever. This is just saying that these are pretty bad people. Bandits would be a good way to think about it. People who don't have any sort of job, certainly not because they're unable to work, but rather because they don't desire to, and they would rather live by dishonest means. People like that, of course, still exist today, unfortunately. And so he hires these worthless men, these bandits, and he goes over to Orpha, which, as you'll recall, is where all of the legitimate, I don't like that word when it comes to talking about parentage, but for this we'll use it, legitimate sons of Gideon. They kill all of them. Only one escapes, apparently, the very youngest one, named Jotham. But as a result for this, Abimelech is basically declaring himself king. Now, it says that Jotham is going to escape, and, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But they did make Abimelech their king. Now, I would argue that he is not the king of all Israel, and we'll see why here in a bit. In verse 7, when it was told to Jotham, remember the idea that all of his brothers had been killed. When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and cried aloud and said to them, "Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Shall I leave my abundance by which gods and men are honored, and go hold sway over the trees?' And the tree said to the fig tree, 'You, come and rule over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go away and hold sway over the trees?' And the tree said to the vine, 'You, come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men, and go hold sway over the trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You, come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.' Now therefore, if you have acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, for my father fought for you, and risked his life, and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king of the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you have acted in good faith and in integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer and lived there because of Abimelech, his brother. All right. Jotham, the only survivor, the son of Gideon, he goes up to Mount Gerizim, which overlooks Shechem. Mount Gerizim has an interesting geological feature. It is directly across from another mountain called Ebal, and those two mountains together make a sort of natural amphitheater. In fact, we've seen this a couple of times. When the Israelites first came in the book of Joshua, they were commanded to have half of the Israelites go stand up on Mount Gerizim, and the other half is going to go stand up in front of Mount Ebal, and they were supposed to shout down the blessings and the cursings of the law, which apparently they ignored by the time we get to the book of Judges. But if you follow God, good things will happen. If you don't, bad things will happen is the summary of that. The specifics are what they're shouting to each other. The idea was so that everybody would remember these things. Well, Mount Gerizim ends up being fairly important in Israel history. Even to this day, there are still Samaritans who believe that Mount Gerizim is the place to worship God. It's an interesting place of religion, I suppose. But when you go to Gerizim, it makes this natural amphitheater. It's a great place if you want everybody down below to hear you. You go up there and you shout from it. That's exactly what Jotham does. He tells a fable. Not a whole lot of those in the Bible, but here you have one. This isn't a parable. It's not something that could actually happen. It's personifying plants. The fable goes something like this. All the plants, all the trees anyway, decided that they wanted a king for themselves. And they went to the fig tree. Was it the fig tree first or the olive tree first? I always get those two mixed up. No, it was the olive tree first. They go to the olive tree first. You be king. And the olive tree says, no, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm already doing. What I'm doing is too important. Go ask somebody else. And so they go now to the fig tree. And they say to the fig tree, hey, be king over us. No, I'm not going to stop making figs so I can be king over you. Go ask somebody else. So they go to the vines, the grapevines. Say, you be king over us. And say, I'm not going to stop making grapes. You ask somebody else. And finally they go to the bramble and ask to the bramble, you be king over us. And the bramble says, you can take shelter under me if you've asked in good faith, but if not, let fire come out and consume you. Certainly a strange fable, but Jotham is going to tell us what this means, at least. You have a hierarchy of plants, a natural hierarchy, right? The largest and most glorious of these plants, apparently, is the olive tree. Obviously, I'm mixing up with the fig, but that's apparently what it is. And they keep going down the list. I shouldn't have to explain to you that a bramble is certainly considered less desirable than either a fig or an olive tree or even a grapevine. And so when you get down to that bramble, that's all they got left. And they say, you be king of us then. The bramble says, well, if I do it, if you're asking in good faith, then this will be shelter for you. But if not, there's going to be fire consumed from you. And so what Jotham says to the people of Shechem, which remember, they didn't actually go with Abimelech to kill all the brothers, all his brothers. They stayed back and they sent some bandits to do it. So the people and the leaders of that city, they're still there. So Jotham goes and he shouts to them that he's essentially saying that Abimelech is the brambles, that all the brothers of Abimelech and Jotham, they were the better choices and they got killed for it. And he's essentially accusing them. You didn't choose Abimelech because you didn't have any other options here, did you? You chose him because you thought this was going to be the most profitable for you. And then he puts a curse upon the people of Shechem. Let fire come out and consume you. And then he goes and he hides in a place that the Bible calls Beer. We don't know exactly where Beer is. The word means well, right? So a famous Israelite city is Beersheba. That means the well of Sheba. It could be several different places, but it probably was within Israel. This is part of the reason I don't think it's accurate to call Abimelech the king of all of Israel, probably more just like the king of Shechem in the area around that, because apparently there was some place in Israel that was safe for Jotham. And Abimelech's ruthlessness with all of his competitors, at least what he saw as competitors. He was probably inspired by the kingdoms around him, by the way. In that period in history, it was extremely common for people to for people to kill all their rival, what they saw as their rival claimants to the throne, their siblings. So he was probably inspired by that, but then he would also have been very disturbed by Jotham's survival, probably wanted him dead. So the fact that he could go anywhere in Israel and be safe probably indicates that Abimelech really didn't have power over all of Israel and rather just Shechem and the area around it. Nevertheless, that's what happened. Jotham puts this curse upon the people of Shechem. Let fire come out and consume you, which, as it turns out, is going to be a little bit more literal than you might think, but we'll see this. Verse 22, Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. And God, by the way, now you might be thinking here, well, there, it just said Abimelech ruled over Israel. The phrasing here is different than when we saw king before. In fact, your translation might say he was a prince over Israel. And you'll recall that the term prince, not really like prince, like son of the king. We might think of it as a lord, maybe a warlord or a chieftain is a better description of these things that we call princes. So to me, this is actually more of an indication that he wasn't the king over all of Israel, but was rather one of many chieftains and princes in Israel. And although I'm sure he had ambitions to rule over all of Israel, maybe he even fancied himself that he did rule all over Israel. Hard to say. Verse 23, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. You know, it's funny, I was just having a conversation yesterday about the lack of demon mentions that we have in the Old Testament. I didn't say that there's never anything there, but that certainly demons are a lot more prominent in the New Testament compared to the Old Testament. This is one of these places where you might have mentions of demons. There's a very similar phrase when it talks about the madness of King Saul, that he had an evil spirit. But in both of these cases, it's hard to see if this is literally an evil spirit or if it's just sort of the natural madness that lust for power can create. Hard to say, but whatever the case, there is a problem now developing between the people of Shechem and Abimelech. And God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hand to kill his brothers. So we have two people who God has deigned to have vengeance put against them, or two groups of people rather. Abimelech himself and the people of Shechem. Let's continue. And the leaders of Shechem the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way, and it was told to Abimelech. So the leaders of Shechem are now starting to, they're starting to go against Abimelech. Whenever, Abimelech apparently is not ruling exclusively from Shechem. We don't know where exactly he is right now. Like I said, I don't think it was just the city of Shechem. I think there was an area around that he was ruling over. And he sends these people over, traitors or government officials, whatever it is. They get ambushed and robbed by the people of Shechem. So this is told to Abimelech. So this is the first little problem we see. And then we see a second one. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, moved into Shechem with his relatives, and the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. And then they went out into the field and gathered the grapes from the vineyards and trod them and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and reviled Abimelech. It's hard to say, by the way, why exactly they had such a problem with Abimelech now. Perhaps it was their own greedy nature, and they thought, hey, not enough of this wealth is being sent our way. Who knows? And Gaal, the son of Ebal, said, Who is Abimelech, and who are we of Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is not Zubal his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? Would that this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. So what they have is essentially one giant party. They get drunk. And during this time, this man Gaal, who apparently is a newcomer to Shechem, begins complaining against Abimelech, and the people are very eager to listen to those complaints. And he says, why are we serving this guy who has family roots not in Shechem? We should be looking out for ourselves. If I were ruling over, why I'd get an army and I'd fight against him. That's what I would do. Unfortunately, this seems to be a drunken boast. And part of the reason I think that is because the governor that Abimelech has left over Shechem is here for the whole thing. The guy's name was Zubal. And we see in verse 30, when Zubal, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem, and they are stirring up the city against you. Now therefore go by night, you and the people who are with you, and set an ambush in the field. Then in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, rise up early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may do to them as your hand finds to do. So, I already managed to forget his name. Zebul. When Zebul hears this, he sends messages secretly to Abimelech, say, hey, you got problems over here, but I got a plan for you. Bring your men, bring your armies up here, and I'll help you ambush Gaal. And that apparently is the plan. So Abimelech, this is verse 34, so Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city, and Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zubal, Look, people are coming down from the mountaintops. And Zubal said to him, You mistake the shadows of the mountain for men. So, right now, apparently this is very early in the morning, probably pre-dawn, very early. You know how it is very early in the morning where you can start to see things, but you're not really seeing in color yet. That's kind of the time I'm imagining this. The gate is just now being opened, and Zebal and Gaal, they are just out there. Probably had a few other people with him as well. The gates of the city was often where officials would go to. And then Gaal says, Look, there are people coming down from the mountain. And Zebal says, Nah, that's just shadows on the mountain. Why are you so paranoid, man? What you worried about? And he continues in verse 37. Gaal spoke again and said, Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak. Then Zebal said to him, Where is your mouth now, you who said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? And are not these the people you despised? Go out now and fight with them. So, at this point, Zebal's going to stop his facetiousness. And Gaal now notices, oh, by the way, there's a whole other company coming straight from the middle. It makes mention of the diviner's oak. There's a more proper name used for this in some of the other versions, but it still means diviner's oak. Interestingly, I believe this is the only place in the Bible the diviner's oak is mentioned, but for the people of Shechem, it was a well-known landmark, apparently. You come down, and now Zebul is going to start openly mocking Gaal and said, well, hey, where are you now, big man? You were just saying about, hey, if I had the opportunity to fight against Abimelech, I would. Well, here's your opportunity. Go out and fight him. Let's see how it works out. And Gaal went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives, so they could not dwell at Shechem. On the following day, the people went out into the field, and Abimelech was told. He told his people and divided them into 3 companies to set an ambush in the fields, and looked and saw the people coming out of the city, so he rose again and killed them. Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while the 2 companies rushed upon all those who were in the field and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it, and he razed the city and sowed it with salt. When all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem heard it, they entered the stronghold of the house of El-Berith. All right, let's pause here for a moment, because all of that can kind of get confusing with the timeline here. And it's not super detailed, so we kind of have to fill in a couple of the blanks as far as we can. But as far as I can tell, this is essentially what happens. Being publicly challenged causes Gaal to take the people of Shechem and fight against Abimelech. And they lose, and they lose badly. So they flee, and they go back into Shechem. However, after only one day, they are again kind of kicked out by the people of Shechem. Probably not absolutely all of Gaal's sympathizers, and I'll explain why that is in a second. But many of them, including Gaal, are kicked back out of Shechem. Abimelech's still waiting for him, so he ambushes them. They're kind of thinking, well, maybe we can creep our way out of him. Maybe they're gone. They're not gone. So they attack it again, and most of the people during the second ambush get killed, but a few of them still manage to get back in the city. Apparently they have enough sympathizers still who will let them back in the city, and thus Abimelech begins sieging the city. It doesn't take very long for him to go in there. Now, the timeline, judges can get really confusing about this because it doesn't try particularly hard to be chronological. Oh well, be convenient for us, but that's not how it works. It mentions him completely destroying the city and sowing it with salt before it actually gets to the last details of it. So, yes, it's going to end with Shechem being destroyed, but there are still several city leaders, probably the rest of the residents, as a matter of fact, who've gone to this place which is described as the Tower of Shechem. Don't think, big skinny tower, think like castle tower, right? Something very similar. This is almost a medieval design, it sounds like, in its description. All of the people have gone to this inner tower because it's the most easily defensible place in the city so that they might survive. All right. Now we're to verse 47. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem were gathered together, and Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwood, and took it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done." So every one of the people cut down his bundle, following Abimelech, and put it against the stronghold. And they set the stronghold on fire over them, so that all the people of the Tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. All right. So this is what Abimelech does. Apparently this wasn't a stone tower. And so what he does is he goes up, he cuts some easily flammable plant material, and he tells all his men to do the same thing, sets it on fire, and then they use this to set the Tower of Shechem on fire, burns it down, and then, as we know from the previous verses, he completely destroys Shechem and sows it with salt. The point of sowing it with salt, by the way, is to destroy the soil quality of the land so that nobody can live there. Famously, the Romans did that to Carthage after the Third Punic War. It was an interesting speculation. I can't remember if he was talking about somebody else's speculation or if he originally made it. But Coffin made speculation that perhaps Abimelech's mother, who, remember, was from Shechem, was among those people that he burned to death. I don't know if you can actually say anything like that conclusively, but boy, we already know he's a really brutal guy, a very sinful guy, clearly. But, man, that would just add even more to it, wouldn't it? All right, remember, Jotham put a curse on 2 groups, the people of Shechem, which has now been fulfilled by Abimelech, and Abimelech himself. So with this last section of this chapter, we're going to see Abimelech get his comeuppance. Verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women, all the leaders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in, and they went to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and drew near to the tower, or the door of the tower, to burn it with fire. So this city Thebez, which for whatever reason, Abimelech also goes against this. Perhaps he's invading sections of Israel he doesn't have control over. Maybe this is part of what he considered to be his territory, and they also rebelled, much like Shechem, so now I'm going to get them too. And so far, the story seems to be repeating itself. He attacks Thebez, and he manages to get through, but the people go into an inner tower, once again, very much like Shechem. And because everything has been looking the same, why not use the same plan? So Abimelech is now drawing near to set the tower of Thebez on fire, just like he did the tower of Shechem. Let's see how it works out. Verse 53. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed me. Woman killed him, and his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Thus ends the life of Abimelech. What happens is, as he's about to set fire to this tower as well, the Bible says that a woman casts an upper millstone. Now, when you hear millstone, you might be tempted to think of those really... hold on, I can't even show you how big when I'm this close. Like really big stones that you see sometimes that nobody actually uses anymore, but sometimes they'll use it for decoration in their front lawn, right? The one with the square holes put through it. And if you've ever seen those things in action, if it's on a mill, a water mill, a windmill, or human or animal powered mill, the thing is supposed to roll along the lower millstone and crush wheat to make flour. And if you think something that big, you might be asking yourself, how on earth did a woman manage to throw that down all by herself? I don't know if anybody is strong enough to do that by themselves. And the answer is probably wasn't that also. If he got hit in the head by one of those things, he probably wasn't doing any talking after that. Instead, this is probably talking about, do you know what a mortar and pestle is? It's a symbol that's often used around pharmacies. It's a small stone bowl, that's the mortar, and then the pestle is a stone stick, and what you do is you go and crush things in that. It works in a similar thing to a millstone, but it's a much smaller package is what you're doing. When it says the upper millstone, it's probably talking about the pestle part of the mortar and pestle. So, not a ridiculously heavy object, but rather a stone that can be held in one hand. It also explains why he was saying anything, but well, I'll let you insert your own punchlines into what he would have been saying afterwards when he got hit in the head with the big kind of millstone. This was the small kind. This was the pestle of a mortar and pestle, probably. He says to his armor bearer, "Kill me so that people can't say that a woman killed me." Remember back in Sisera, part of the curse against him is that a woman was going to be the one who killed him. It was considered a great dishonor to die by the hand of a woman, which is why he would rather have his servant kill him. By the way, that doesn't count. Abimelech, you were killed by a woman. Ha ha. Apparently you don't like that, so there you go. Abimelech was absolutely killed by a woman. His servant just finished the job. Killed him right there. And thus ended the kingship of Abimelech. And honestly, what I think you're seeing here is the end of another one of these punishment eras. And I'll go into that a little bit more during our next chapter, because the two judges that are mentioned there's not a whole lot mentioned about the next judge, Tola. I'm kind of the opinion. It says that, I just said I'm going to wait till next chapter. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait till next chapter, and then I'll tell you about Tola. Thank you, DJ. Very good. Thank you, Aunt Faye. Really appreciate that. We are going to be, of course, same time next week. If you got any questions or comments, please let me know. You know how to find me. Until then, love you all. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye.